Good morning, everybody, in person and online. I'm going to be doing today and next Sunday. So this is about Dogen Zenji's, there's Dogen over there on the wall, work called Uji, or Being Time. And I want to start first with a question. How do we transcend our view of separateness? Is there another lens to help us examine a question and doubt our conventional view of reality? And of course, many Buddhist works help, I think. Even the Heart Sutra we chanted points to the identity of form and emptiness. But maybe this concept of his being time gives us a different way of seeing this. And so today I'm going to introduce it, talk about its definition, the qualities, identities of this central concept of being time. Basically, two words hyphenated but together. How it relates to our Soto practice, and then how it differs, he addresses of that, his concept versus our conventional views of time. Next installment, next week, I will continue with Uji and how it relates to our practice, what Dogen exhorts us to do. But first, I'll offer some suggestions about studying Dogen, because Dogen can be extremely deep. Uji is two syllables, two characters, one word. Now sometimes, unfortunately, it's rendered as for the time being. But that suggests temporary, right, for the time being. And of course, that suggests impermanence, which is good in Buddhism, but it's far less than Dogen's point. It's better understood as all the present states and forms that's included in this present moment, the now. So we're going to expand on this. So why study being time? Well, because it's the state where all form and emptiness that we talk about in the Heart Sutra, right? Where those play out continually. It's the only possible place in time where delusion or enlightenment are illuminated or manifest. It's the only possible time it would happen right now, right? So Dogen starts off, and time being and being time is interchangeable, because you'll see it's really identity, and it's basically different aspects of the same truth he's getting at. In the first section, he says, for the time being here means time itself is being, and all being is time. What does that remind you of, that last phrase? Time is being, and being is time. Sounds kind of like form is emptiness, emptiness is form in the Heart Sutra, right? So he's still pointing to the same thing, although he's using slightly different words for it. And he continues, any form, whether it's your form, a golden 16-foot Buddha or whatever, any form is time. And because it's time, there is the radiant illumination of time. Something's being illuminated in that present moment. My comment, so what illuminates you this moment? Every moment. That's a very, very basic thing to consider. What makes body, mind, and consciousness possible? This moment. Now this moment. Now this moment. What's doing that? The radiant illumination of time, my take is it's all the conditions making a form possible in the present moment. Time and being is existence, and they're not separated into two things. Every moment is connected throughout all space and time, and they're illuminated at all points by intimate connection, filled with interconnections. Dogen points out this intimate connections of all things. And then he continues, he says, study being time as the 12 hours of the present. Now back then, they didn't say 24 hours, they counted 12. Any particular form is time, and because it's time, it's not separated from those hours of the present moment. So all beings and forms are contained in each and every present moment 24/7, to translate it into our words today. Our Norman Fisher, who's in our tradition, who also studied with Suzuki Roshi, says on this point, time is illuminated by the presence of awakening. In other words, he says, study the 24 hours of the day, study them. Look for the illumination in every moment. Now, Fisher goes on to even use our modern term of love, although I prefer, because it has different connotations, I would call it intimate connection. But I think he's driving at a similar thing. Then Dogen shifts to our relationship with time. He focuses on that word. He says, time is not separate from you. And as you're present, time doesn't go away. So my version would be, so time is whatever is manifesting, supporting you and everything else in the present moment. That's what time is. It may be too complicated to explain, but that's what's happening. He then continues, and Dogen says, time is not marked by coming or going, although we think it is, right? Because we have to be on time and we'll dismiss at the proper time. But he says, if time persists, you are time being right now. This is the meaning of being time. My version would be time always about. I am time right now, separate, not separate from anything / everything. He then continues, time being has the quality of flowing, which you can think of like constant change. So-called time, meaning the present moment, flows into tomorrow. Today flows into yesterday. Yesterday flows into today. And today flows into today, so long as it's today. Tomorrow flows into tomorrow. Because flowing is a quality of time. Moments of past and present do not overlap or line up side by side. My comment is, well, being time is flowing, but what flows? What flows? I think he's pointed at something to examine, which he will actually state later. Flowing is the illumination of time in the present moment. Objects are empty of permanent being, but completely filled in time, the present moment, full of conditions, absolutely full, interconnected. Now, Norman Fisher about this says the time being can't be static or still because it isn't anything at all. Now, he doesn't mean nothing exists. He says it's not a fixed permanent thing, right? Which corresponds to Buddhist teachings. You can't catch time, he says. Still, each time has its appearance and function, and each time holds everything. And then Fisher makes an extremely important point that this concept reveals. He says, Dogen had another term that he used to like to talk about when he talked about practice, and it's practice hyphen enlightenment. Practice is enlightenment, basically. And Fisher says practice enlightenment is the moment of practice. And then he says something that caught my attention. I hope it'll catch yours. We are not practicing for a future enlightenment. It won't happen in the future. It will happen in the present, the now, the time being. So practice enlightenment is in the time being. That's it. terribly important point, especially for Soto Zen, especially for followers of Dogen Zenji. So my version is practice enlightenment of Dogen's can only be in this moment, in the present moment, not realized in the future. If I'm sitting hoping and waiting for future enlightenment, I'm missing the point and I'm a million miles away from it. Some people would say almost like it's like spiritual bargaining. Okay, if I sit really hard, someday I'm going to be illuminated and enlightened. No. Nope. Dogen never said that. He's saying the opposite here. He says, just actualize all time. That means in the present moment as all being. There's nothing extra. Vigorously abiding in each moment is the time being. Does that give us kind of a hint of how to practice? I think it does. Vigorously abiding in each moment is the time being. And then he warns us again, do not mistakenly confuse it as non-being, because that's the mistake of nihilism. Do not forcefully assert it as a thing or being, like, in other words, permanence. He says, in the middle of those two extremes, in the middle, that's the middle path of Buddhism, isn't it? That's the middle way. So, actualize time being completely. Don't try and figure it out. Don't try and name it. Don't try and wish it differently. Don't try and grasp it. Each moment contains each thing and all things. And then Norman Fisher ended his commentary on this one with, so just constantly investigate the time being, or being time. There's nothing beyond this. And we can never limit it. And then he says the time being is always completely fulfilled and incompletely fulfilled. And at first glance you go, what? What sort of double talk is that? It's not double talk, folks. Each moment is completely fulfilled. Each moment is as it is. It's suchness. Yet, it will never be completely fulfilled in the sense that there's some final stopping point. There's some final state, because it's empty of that, right? That's what emptiness or shunyata says. So that time being is entirely actualized without being caught in nets or cages, is how Dogen puts it. Closely examine flowing. And Shohaku Okamura, who's also in our traditions, written books that various Soto groups have used, observed about Uji, says the present moment is ungraspable, even though it's the only actual moment of experience. It's the only moment of experience, yet how would you ever describe it? So that's the aspect of the time aspect of being time. But being means we have to also address forms, right? Us, bodies, things, rocks, mountains. So Dogen says the way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment of time. That's pretty easy to do because everything is temporary, isn't it? It's impermanent. Things do not hinder one another just as moments do not hinder one another. My version is the small self and also the big self is illuminated by all things in the universe. Intimately, completely connected. Now Dogen brings time and being together. And this is one personally I've been sitting with at home. Since there is nothing but just this moment, the time being is all the time there is. Each moment is all being is the entire world. Reflect now whether any being or any world is left out of this present moment, what would it be? It can't be, right? So the way I'd put it, I'd personalize it and say, you're not alive yesterday, and I'm not alive tomorrow, but only right now. If the illumination of time failed me now, I wouldn't be conscious or alive. That's Dogen's being time. Now he knows that we have conventional senses of time, so he knows he has to address that. And he says in the 7th section, do not think that time merely flies away. If time merely flew away, you'd be separated from time. The reason you do not clearly understand the time being is you think of time only as passing. In essence, all things in the entire world are linked with one another as moments. Because all moments are the being time, they're also your being time. So we're never separated from time. Time doesn't pass. In fact, time is what illuminates us and keeps us alive. I hope it doesn't pass. Someday it will. But and everything is interconnected, is intimately connected in this moment. And then he says, and you may suppose that time is only passing away and not understand that time never arrives because there's never a final stopping point. People only see times coming and going and do not thoroughly understand that the time being abides in each moment. And even if people recognize the time being in each moment, who could give expression to that experience, that recognition? It'd be just too indescribable, too mind-blowing. And then he has kind of a poetic, I call it poetic because a lot of haiku makes references to seasons. So he says, his final challenge to our relative view he says, do not think flowing is like wind and rain moving from east to west across the valley. The entire world is not unchangeable. It is not immovable. It flows. And then he says, flowing is like spring. Spring, with all of its numerous aspects, is flowing. When spring flows, there's nothing outside of spring. That's what it is. He says, study this in detail. So this is not a philosophical treatise. This is actually telling us what to look at. Spring invariably flows all during spring. Although flowing itself is not spring, flowing occurs throughout spring. Thus, flowing is complete at just this moment of spring. He says, examine this thoroughly, coming and going. In your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective is outside yourself, dualistically that is, and that you're moving through hundreds of thousands of worlds over hundreds and thousands and eons of time, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. Because the Buddha way stands back from that relative world, doesn't it? It invites you to look for beyond or behind that conventional view. My version is, so each moment is complete. Flowing is all part of being. Although flowing isn't me, flowing occurs throughout me. And I capitalize me, because it's not just this little guy here, Norm. It includes great mind, Buddha mind, being time. Don't see self separate from everything else. So that's basically being time, time aspect, being aspect together, as opposed to our conventional views of time. and what we think is passing, what we think is real. So again, I repeat the question at the beginning of my talk. How can we transcend our view of separateness? Well, I think Uji helps, this concept of being time. Because the first step is to examine, question, and doubt our views about time. Then realizing that we're only alive in this being time moment, each moment. Realizing that without the illumination of time in each moment, you, me, nothing would, it wouldn't exist. It has to be illuminated by something. And I might add that Rinzai also said, he didn't use these terms, but he says, you know, what animates you as a lump of flesh with the bones and the skin, what animates you? Otherwise, it's just dead meat, right? So what animates you? But then you need to get beyond these sort of crutches that I've laid out and transcend so that there's no self or other. Or as Dogen said in the Genjo Koan, study the self is to forget the self. And then he says later that the self is illuminated by the 10,000 things. It's exactly what he wrote later in Being Time. He's really referring to the same thing. Also helpful is to tell us not to chase future enlightenment, right? That's a helpful tip. Because it's so easy to get off track. We'll try and make deals and bargains. Oh, if I just sit more, you know, if I just, you know, set more regularly. And practice also includes realizing what is in this moment, each and every moment. So with that, I think that could help us pierce that veil of separateness, dualism, that blocks our view of our actual enlightenment, our actual Buddhahood. Yet, Dogen would also say, but your views and doubts are also just being time that you're holding at the moment. And he would also say your delusion is also illuminated by being time, causes and conditions. And your enlightenment, when it happens, is also illuminated in being time.